Hello, Tech fans, and welcome in to episode 136 of the Tech Sideline Podcast, originating from TSL's High Tech Studios in the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. It has been a long 6 months for so many. Hokie sports were taken away from Tech fans, but today on the Tech Sideline Podcast, we get to break down something we can all rejoice in, a Hokies win. It all gets started right now. And we welcome you back into the Tech Sideline Podcast, whether you are watching archived on YouTube, listening on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Amazon Music, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or on Stitcher. So many great ways to consume the Tech Sideline Podcast. We are so glad that you could join us as we record on Monday morning, September 28th, following a Virginia Tech win against North Carolina State on Saturday. We've got our managing editor, Chris Coleman, our founder and general manager, Will Stewart. He is the best producer in the land, Malcolm Stewart, and I am your podcast host, Evan Hughes. Gentlemen, good morning. It's great to be back with you. The Hokies victorious. How does it feel to start your week off 1-0?
Feels good to be talking about an actual football game rather than just hypotheticals. I think everybody was getting sick and tired of doing that. There's only so much of that you can do. So thank goodness that we're finally able to play.
Yeah, the off season was almost a month longer than it usually is, and I remember I can't remember if I mentioned this on the podcast or on a radio show the other day. I went to see Virginia Tech basketball play in the ACC tournament, and I think they shut things down the very next day. And that grind from when Tech basketball is over to when Tech football starts is difficult enough. We didn't even have spring sports to go through. And it was extended an extra 3 weeks, right? Mm-hmm. Arguably 4. I mean, September 26th, maybe they would have started the season on August, very late August. It's just been a really, really long time, and I'm so glad it's over.
And there's so many positives to talk about today. Yeah. And Virginia Tech's win over North Carolina State, that's what we're going to spend all of today's podcast talking about. We'll talk about the offense, the defense, who stepped up, both on the field and coaching for Virginia Tech. A lot to get into. Episode 136 of the Tech Sideline Podcast. It's brought to you this week and every week by the Fisher Law Firm, Virginia's trusted DUI and traffic defense firm dedicated to defending individuals charged with traffic-related offenses. The Fisher Law Firm handles cases throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. To date, the firm has defended tens of thousands of people charged with moving violations. For a free consultation, call anytime, day or evening, toll-free. 1-800-680-7031 is the number. That's 1-800-680-7031. Or you can email the Fisher Law Firm at info@fisherlegal.com. Well, I turn it over to you. A couple of housekeeping notes, and we start off by talking about masks on the podcast, and you and Chris rocking grit masks. Those look exceptionally well.
Rocking the grit mask, yes. So we continue to get comments and questions on why we're wearing masks during the podcast. It's really simple. We are working in close quarters with a couple of students for 90 minutes, and it's actually closer to 3 hours because there's about an hour and a half of post-processing. And students have been told, regardless of the other stuff, how it is said to be the right thing to do, it helps slow the spread of the virus. Regardless of where you stand on mask wearing and not wearing masks, Virginia Tech has said they want their students wearing masks when they are indoors for, extended periods of time. And so that's the biggest reason we're doing this, because this is posted to YouTube. There's video evidence out there. And, so we feel it's the right thing to do. And we don't want our students, we don't want Evan and Malcolm getting into trouble. So we continue to get the questions. So that's addressing that. And, of course, today we are wearing the grit masks, and we'll get to them in a little while. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Southeast Regional Training Center for sponsoring the podcast, southeastrtc.com. And also to Campus Emporium. We've got a very cool tumbler that we'll be featuring later on in the podcast.
We mentioned Southeast Regional Training Center. Quick note, Tony Roby getting a contract extension late last week. A big congratulations to Coach, who's been on the podcast set many of times.
Yeah.
big congratulations to him and his family.
Now, have they come out with a wrestling schedule yet? Have you caught any wrestling news?
I don't think they have. They haven't come out with a men's basketball schedule yet. We know they're going to play like starting around November 25th.
November 25th.
They still haven't released a schedule.
Yeah.
So let's just begin the podcast talking about this. Certainly, first game of the year, different for so many. No tailgating. If you're in Blacksburg, sticking with your pod is what you were told to do. Only 1,000 fans in the stadium, and the four of us were in different places tailgating. So actually, I want to start with Malcolm real quick, because Malcolm lives on Center Street, and there's a picture that Barstool Virginia Tech put out there, a picture of the same camera angle, 2019 Center Street to 2020, and my goodness, very different. So Malcolm, from a student perspective, what was Center Street like on Saturday?
It was sad, in a word. But it was mostly just police patrol. The one entrance on, I think it's Harold Street, that gets you into center had 6 cop cars in it for however many hours students were potentially coming in. And it was just weird. It was quiet. It was just police and a couple of kids here and there. That was my whole day.
Now, the students that actually live on Center Street and Warren Street and Harold Street and all that, were they in their yards tailgating, or was there anything going on at all?
Just a few. I mean, I was out in my yard, but there was one other place that I could hear, and that was it.
Chris, what did you do for the game?
Sat on my couch and watched it. Now here's the real reason I picked NC State. The last 2 times I watched a Virginia Tech football game on my own couch in my own home was the second half of the 2019 UVA game and the 2010 Stanford Orange Bowl. For every other game, I've either been at the game, at a bar. I like to be around in a certain environment when I watch games. I don't like to sit around on my couch by myself. I like to be out there around people and in places where there's a lot of noise and things like that. That's just what I like. So for 2 decades, Virginia Tech had a 0% winning percentage when I watched the game
Chris
at home.
was on his couch.
But that snapped the streak. That streak's over.
And there was one person amongst the four of us who actually was in Lane Stadium on Saturday. That was Will Stewart. So, Will, what was it like to be in Lane on Saturday?
So I was in the press corps in the press box for the first time since 2015. Pretty sure my last home game in the Lane Stadium press box was Frank Beamer's last home game that they lost to UNC. So I got the message and quit going to the press box. I was in the box from 2012 to 2015, and later on today in the Monday Thoughts article I'm going to write today, I'm going to post a picture of the seating chart for the press box. And you'll see how everybody is spaced out. And there were only seats for 12 media members, and 5 of those were from NC State. So there's about 7 Virginia Tech media members, and one of them, Mike Barber, actually wasn't there. He was covering UVA and Duke. And the rest of it was like support personnel. So we were very spread out. So that is 11 media members. And the first game I ever worked was the 2012 Georgia Tech game. Labor Day night game. Virginia Tech was coming off their 2nd straight 11-win season and 8th straight 10-win season. Hokies were ranked, I think, 16th in the country, so it was a big deal. And Logan Thomas was coming off a great year, and it was his first game in his second year as a starting quarterback. And that night, I remember the press box was packed. In the row in front of me, there were 9 NFL scouts. And I had Heather Dinich from ESPN was sitting next to me, and then me, and I just counted up 11 people just in that tiny little group. The whole press box was full. And then the other night there were just 11 of us total, so it was a very different experience. One thing I thought was kind of strange driving in was that a lot of the cues, for lack of a better word, were the same. There were still police cars sitting out at the traffic circles, even though there was no traffic. There were still people, sitting
$20 for parking.
There were still people sitting at the entrance to all of the parking lots. There were still support personnel wheeling around on the little carts. In some ways, it was almost staffed up like it usually is, except of course there was just nobody around, and the parking lots were, I'm not going to say completely empty. Honestly, I didn't spend a lot of time looking at them, but they were pretty empty.
I almost walked up there. Like, I took my walk from my house all the way downtown. I walked by Tots, which at 4:30 in the afternoon seemed pretty loud. So it'll be interesting to see if there's a spike in a couple of weeks. But anyway, so I thought about like walking all the way up to Lane Stadium, but I chose not to. I did. There was a woman drove by me and she stopped and she asked how to get to the football stadium, and I'd just gone by Tots and had taken a left up towards Washington Street, and I said, just go up this road and then take a right, and you can't miss it. And I'm guessing it was like a player's mom, like the tags were from Florida. So it was either like a Tech player's mom or NC State's player's mom. Yeah, they're the only people that go to the game.
Yeah,
And,
there were no tickets sold to the public.
Yeah.
So Clark Rulin got in somehow.
Clark Rulin,
I
of course, was going to
Clark
get it.
Rulin was in the game.
That's how I saw the video of Enter Sandman. It was because he put it on Twitter, and it was sad.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my next question for you. What was the Enter Sandman experience like?
Well, you're insulated up there in the press box. So you can't. I don't know if you can even open the windows or not, but they don't open them. So the sound is always deadened. But I actually went down to the end of the press box and set my phone up, and I took a video. It's a 2-minute video of. It's the end of the "Let's Go Hokies" chant, and then up until after the players are well out onto the field. So I posted that to our YouTube channel, Tech Sideline YouTube channel. It's about a 2-minute long video of Enter Sandman, Virginia Tech versus NC State, September 26, 2020. And, I what can you say? It was weird seeing just a few people hopping up and down, and there was no channel of core members and cheerleaders and things to run through. Now the players, when they come out of there, they always go all the way down to the far south end zone, and some of them kneel in a moment of prayer. I'd say half the Virginia Tech players do that, and it's done in front of the core. Of course, the core wasn't there, so it was all odd. But a lot of the stuff. A lot of the other stuff was the same. They're running the game day operation as similar as they can to how they usually run it.
So despite 23 players being unavailable to play, 2 full-time coaches being unavailable to coach, including first-year defensive coordinator Justin Hamilton, no Hendon Hooker, limited practices for the last couple of weeks, Chris Coleman, how would you describe the 45-24 win for the Hokies over the Wolfpack?
As good as you could possibly expect, especially when you lose your defensive coordinator the morning of the game, right? And I would say Ryan Smith, who did a great job, is not normally the second string defensive coordinator. I can't talk with any mask on, apparently.
Yes.
I would say normally that would be Tracy Claeys. But Tracy Claeys was out.
Yeah, and he's got 10 years experience as a defense coordinator.
And I would even say maybe Tierlink would be your normal number 3, but Tierlink missed all week of practice. He was out all week, so he did not get to go to practice at all and interact with the players in person all week. So I don't think he made it back till game day, basically. So it's kind of hard to give the defensive coordinator job to somebody who hasn't been in practice all week. So kind of by default, it fell to Ryan Smith. So when you consider all of that, it was really impressive. I was mainly concerned, we didn't know who was going to be out and who wasn't and everything like that. My biggest concern was how much practice time everybody had, the guys who did play. And Virginia Tech rotated a lot of players as a result. They played 19 different players on offense and I think 26 or so different players on defense, which is a lot. And, they were even playing like walk-on Max Philpott at defensive tackle like in the first quarter. And that's not something you would normally do. So they were very concerned about conditioning. Fuente said on his radio show after the game, he was like, we're up 17-0, and I felt awful because I looked on the field and all our guys looked gassed. Yeah. Which was accurate because we did kind of go into a lull at that point. I think when I was on my walk on Saturday, I was thinking like, if coronavirus didn't exist and I knew both teams were at full strength and had practiced all month, etc., what score would I pick? And I settled on Tech 38, NC State 17 because I thought Tech was much better than NC State. But the reason I picked NC State was because Tech wasn't able to practice, really. But as it turned out, even a 38-17 pick wouldn't have done Tech justice. I mean, Tech looked like they were 30 or 40 points better than NC State if everything had been equal. If Tech had been able to practice effectively and they had all their guys. Now, NC State was missing some guys on defense, too.
Yeah.
Peyton Wilson was out. Ingle, one of the starting safeties, was out. So it goes both ways.
Yeah. I don't know. A lot went through my head while he was talking. Fuente. So let's start with this. Fuente did address in his post-game comments the potential for fatigue pretty quickly, and he was on top of that. He was, as Chris talked about, he was rotating guys in, and he was very sensitive to that. And one of the things that fans need to understand is, and I learned this at the 2017 FedEx game against WVU. That was the first game of the year. Now, granted, WVU was a fast-moving offense.
So was NC State. They tried to.
Yeah, but after that 2017 game against WVU, at the end, the Hokies were gassed. And remember, they had a lot of good defensive players that year.
Justin Fuente was asked by Burnup after the game on the radio show. Always listen to the radio show instead of his regular press conferences, by the way.
Yeah.
And Fuente said it reminded him of the West Virginia game as far as fatigue goes.
Yeah, so the guys at the end of that, you go back and watch the end of that game. Virginia Tech was lucky WVU didn't score at the end. You could just tell VT's defense was gassed. And so it started this whole discussion of, come on, guys, you've had all summer to get in shape. And the point was brought up, and I don't remember who did the game for ESPN or ABC or whatever, but they made the point that football shape is different. You can run all the stadium steps you want to run, but playing is different, and you have to get in that shape. Mm-hmm. And so there wasn't, you talk. So the question comes up, I know the guys weren't practicing, but couldn't they have worked out? You just cannot. There's nothing like it.
You can't do it. Yeah.
So, when I was prepping for this, there were so many different directions I feel like we could have gone with to start this game.
Yeah.
So let me ask a generic question here. The one storyline from this game was what for you, Chris, and then we'll get to Will.
Certainly the performance of the offensive line. We knew they were going to be better. We didn't know exactly how much better. They blocked well from a running game standpoint at the end of last year. I mean, they ran all over Kentucky, about 250 yards or thereabouts. Very, very impressive performance in that game. But when they blocked Kentucky, it was more about spacing and leverage and just kind of getting in Kentucky's way. This was that, but they also just brutally drove NC State off the ball. They were just stronger than NC State. And I go back to what I've been saying all offseason is, Virginia Tech was starting those three freshmen next to each other on the offensive line, and it is not fair to expect freshman offensive linemen to compete physically with junior and senior and even like redshirt sophomore defensive linemen at the college level. They're just not going to have the strength to drive them off the ball. These are still 18-year-olds, man. They haven't had the opportunity in the weight room. We saw Doug Nestor. I mean, that was the Doug Nestor that was committed to Ohio State at some point, right? Big difference between 18-year-old Doug Nestor and now grown man Doug Nestor.
I can't remember it's one of the touchdown runs. I can't remember if it's Quincy late in the game or Raheem Blackshear. Just watch what Doug Nestor does to number 12 for NC State. I don't know his name, but number 12 had enough of Quincy Patterson running over him and Doug. So Doug Nestor pancakes him into the end zone. And Brock Hoffman talked after the game about trying to instill, not just competence in the offensive line, but an attitude, a nastiness. And so Nestor puts number 12 on his can and then walks towards him and lets him know about it. And I'm an old school guy. I'm not a big fan of trash talk, but I've gotten, you like to see that edge. That there's no way to describe that. That was nasty. So what Chris is addressing is, there was a lot of one-on-one physical dominance in that game by the
Right.
offensive line.
Right, as opposed to, really, really good play call that helped put the
Hey,
offense.
I got in this guy's way, and he didn't make the tackle.
Well, Cornelson did a great job last year hiding the fact that his offensive line had 3 freshmen starting next to each other. It's really tough to scheme around, and he was able to do it. You don't have to do it as much this year. Hoffman is a guy. Hoffman said last week that him not getting cleared by the NCAA last year was a blessing in disguise, and he's absolutely right because he got the red shirt. And let me give you an example of the difference between a red shirt year and a normal year if you're practicing and you're playing. Fridays is basically a walkthrough, right? So you don't even really need the scout team guys. Really, you're red shirting guys. Like you're not playing in a football game the next day. So you can have a really hardcore weightlifting session on Friday and you don't have to worry about recovery for the next day.
Yeah.
Right? So you can really, your red shirt year is when you make the most progress in the weight room because you can lift weights more. And Hoffman got that opportunity because he got thrown into the fire at Coastal Carolina as a true freshman.
Yeah, that's true.
Never got the red shirt there. So I think he really learned the benefit of that red shirt year, and it's huge. I don't mean to derail the conversation into a red shirt year again, but Hoffman got to sit out last year. Everybody's a year stronger. Everybody's a year more experienced. It's just so it's night and day. And I'm not saying they're going to rush for 314 yards every game, but it wasn't the fact that they rushed for 314 against NC State. It was how they blocked. They were just physically dominant. Like, it wasn't necessarily like against Kentucky, it was scheme and play calling.
Yeah.
And this was just about like 1996 style Virginia Tech football, just mauling them off the ball.
Will, if you had to pick one storyline from this game, what would you go with?
Well, once you get beyond the offensive line, it's the depth at quarterback that Virginia Tech had, and NC State didn't have it available to them. What's the name of the back? Not the backup. He's supposed to be their starter. The quarterback who came in like midway through the third quarter.
Devin Leary?
Devin Leary. So Devin Leary's supposed to be their starter. He had coronavirus issues, probably contact tracing. So who's the guy start? Brockman?
Bailey Hockman.
Bailey Hockman. All I could think was Brock Hoffman because we were just
very close.
So Bailey Hockman, he wasn't good. He's technically their backup, and he was not good, and made a couple of really horrendous plays. The interception by Devon Diablo was a great play by him, but the interception by Breon Murray was just a terrible play. And so Virginia Tech didn't have to go to a Hockman. They got to go to a Burmeister and then to a Quincy Patterson when they needed him. And as I've said many times, and Chris had pointed it out to me first, this Virginia Tech coaching staff is very good at putting their quarterbacks in a position to succeed. Quarterbacks, with the exception of Ryan Willis early last year, quarterbacks under Justin Fuente and Bud Cornelson don't throw a lot of picks. They are not put in situations where they won't succeed. Now, to be fair, let's get down into Quincy Patterson. I thought one of the big points of the game was when NC State had just crammed it down Virginia Tech's throat to close it to 17-7. State finally got a clue and just lined up, double-teamed the defensive tackles, and just drove down the field with the running game, which is the strength of our offense. So they make it 17-7, and you're kind of going, huh. And at that point, Burmeister was out with that bizarre hand cramp, and Quincy had played a series, at least one series, a lot of handing off. So they come in at 17-7, and they start letting him throw the ball around a little bit, and he completes, I think, 3 passes, including the touchdown to, was it Tavion Robinson that caught the first one, I think?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
It included, if I remember correctly, a great catch by Caleb Smith on 3rd and 11.
It's a horrific catch.
And Mitchell had a big one on 3rd and 12.
Yep.
Mitchell had a big one downfield, and then Tavion fought off the defender. The point I'm making is they weren't well-thrown balls. They were, in 2 cases, the Mitchell and Robinson case, they were thrown into coverage, throw it up and let the wide receiver go get it.
Right.
So I thought that was just a critical point in the game. It put Virginia Tech back up 24-7, Quincy should be given a lot of credit, but his wide receivers should also be given a lot of credit
I
for
thought-
making plays.
Well, that goes back to the running game. I mean, there's no reason to play single
Yeah,
coverage when
yeah.
Quincy Patterson's at quarterback, because at this point he's going to struggle to process and read zone coverages. Playing single coverage across the board just gives him easy reads. It makes his job so much easier. So on that 3rd and 12, when they completed it to Mitchell, you could see what was coming. NC State was in single coverage, and I'm like, at least one of those receivers on the left-hand side is going deep.
So was Mitchell out? I guess he was out wide on that, right?
He was the inside receiver. I think the outside receiver came in, and Mitchell was the slot guy, and he went out and up. Yeah, but I understand why NC State did it. I mean, Virginia Tech was just bludgeoning them with the running game, and you have to get an extra. Dave Doran talked about it after the game about getting an extra safety in the box, and of course that forced them into man coverage. Now, when they didn't need to do it, was that 3rd and 12 pass to Mitchell. There's no reason to be single coverage, extra guy in the box there, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You just take your chances and assume Quincy Patterson's not going to rush for 12 yards, and you zone it up on that play. So I thought that was a bad call by NC State. But other than that, it was the success of Virginia Tech's running game that helped put Quincy in a more favorable position.
So you went with the offensive line for the story, with the quarterback depth, and I'll go back to a point that we just brought up. I'm going to go with the fact that, again, Ryan Smith as the interim defensive coordinator for the game, given the fact that you've got a year of transition, you've got a couple of new schemes, no Tracy Clays, no Jack Tyler. Can you imagine what was going through his mind coming from? We talked about it last week, right? Coming from JMU, you're thinking you're going to coach 2 of the top cornerbacks in the entire country. Okay, then that changes. Waller did not play. We'll talk about that in just a minute. All the players that Tech were missing. And I thought that he called an exceptional game.
Yeah, he did well.
Assuming he was the one calling it, I mean, I don't know that Fuente addressed it directly in his comments to the media.
Oh, he called it.
Yeah, okay.
I mean,
so he was calling.
Well, if you're going to name somebody defensive coordinator, on the day of the game, there's nothing else for that guy
now,
to do.
was he on the sidelines or in the booth?
He would have been on. I'm pretty sure he was on the sideline.
Okay.
Yeah, I know he was on the sideline. I mean, there was nobody else to call it. I mean, the job of the defensive coordinator is to be the main guy in the game plan throughout the week and then call the plays on game day. So the game plan was already done.
So you're right.
He definitely called him. Yeah.
So Hamilton could have called in strategy during timeouts, but as far as play calls go, I remember on the ACC Network broadcast at one point they were talking about Tech showing a certain type of defense before the snap and then backing out of it, and that's a defensive coordinator actively telling the defense what to do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's an in-game adjustment and things like that.
And you feel too for Justin Hamilton, right? You've got your
I
whole
know.
off season, and then to have that happen, you're supposed to make your debut. You're taking over for the guy that
Yeah.
you played for.
So now you get that asterisk where they'll be talking years. Let's say Justin Hamilton has a good career, and he's at Virginia Tech 5, 10, 15 years or someone else, and they'll be talking about what defenses have done under him as defensive coordinator. The announcers, if they're doing their due diligence when they're saying the number of games he's been the defensive coordinator, they'll have to subtract this one. And they may even have to subtract next week. I think he's going to be out next week as well.
Yeah, the long-term trivia question for Virginia Tech fans, 20 years from now, the trivia question will be, who was defensive coordinator in the first game after Bud Foster retired?
That'll be the Aflac trivia question.
People are going to say Justin Hamilton, and then they remember, oh, wait, no, he had COVID, and it was Ryan Smith.
It was Ryan
Which,
Smith.
by the way, Hamilton tested positive he tested on Friday.
It was the Friday test.
They got their results back at Fuente said, he said this on his radio show, said he went to bed on Friday night, and he slept in until 6 a.m., the way he described it.
Yeah.
And he said that was the best night of sleep he had gotten in months.
In a while.
Because at that point he figured, we've cleared everything. All I have to do is worry about football now. And he's a straight-up football guy, right? So he gets up at 6 o'clock, looks at his phone, and saw that he got a text at 1:20 saying J-Ham tested positive and he's out. And he's like, are you kidding me?
Got to get up and deal with that.
Yeah, exactly. Just strange situation.
And quickly, again, we've got a lot to get into the game, but there was so much that happened before the game and all of this. I think it's worth unpacking. you think about who he had available to practice with this week, player-wise, but his coaching staff. How much credit does Justin Fuente deserve for this win and the job he was able to do given all of these unique circumstances?
Well, I said, I think I may have said it on the podcast. I think I said it in our game preview.
You definitely said it on the
Virginia Tech
podcast.
wins this game, then it'll be one of the better coaching jobs of his career at Tech. And I stand by that. You know, this may seem obvious to some people, but some coaches could have been really bullheaded about it. He was very sensitive to the fatigue factor, and I thought he played that portion of the strategy very well. Now, his players helped him out by executing and jumping up to a 17-0 lead. I mean, from that point on, this game was 28-24. Getting that early lead was critical so you can continue to rotate guys, you know, and there were a couple of defensive possessions where they just rotated guys in, and I'm not going to say they let NC State do what they were doing, but they kind of had no choice.
Mm-hmm.
They had to keep guys fresh. So I think a lot of coaches can be bullheaded. I think a lot of coaches would have been bullheaded. I'm throwing my starters out there, and they're going to have to win it for me. I don't care. But I thought that was really smart on his part.
He said in one of their scrimmages, they intentionally took coordinators out during the middle of the scrimmage and just threw somebody else in there to call plays during the middle of the scrimmage.
Smart.
You know, he's very, very good at like preparing for scenarios.
Yeah.
All the guy does is think about football.
Yeah.
So that's a situation you would expect him to be good in, and you know, I do think it's a situation he certainly excels in. So yeah, I thought that was a big time win. And the thing about it is, you know, there's going to be some different challenges this week with Justin Hamilton. I think this is the point I was trying to get to earlier, and I lost it in my head. Hamilton tested positive on Friday, so that's 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
That means he's not coordinator for the Duke game,
Yep.
right? It means he's not at practice all week. Now, he can watch practice film. He can get on Zoom and help with the game plan and everything like that. But the bottom line is he's not going to be in practice with those players, coaching them after specific plays. Like, you run a play in practice, and you immediately go talk to your safety to tell him, oh, here's what you did wrong, or great job, here's what you did right, blah, blah, blah. It's just, there's only so much you can do on Zoom sitting in your living room, right? So he's not going to be your defensive coordinator next week, but he can be actively involved in game planning. But if Ryan Smith is your defensive coordinator again, we don't know when Clays will be back either, right? So if Ryan Smith's your defensive coordinator again, that means he does take a more active role in game planning this week than he did last week.
Yeah.
So different week, different challenge, right?
So just about an hour before kickoff or so, it's announced that Virginia Tech won't have 23 players available. Will, you tweeted it out, who on offense and their number, their last name, who on defense.
Now I only tweeted out, I think, the scholarship guys. I left off some walk-ons.
Good point. And there were a couple of names of note, you know, Wheatley, King, Janzi, Jackson. Then on the defensive side of the ball, really Jermaine Waller was one of the big ones. But no Jermaine Waller, no Hendon Hooker. When you saw those names, were you more concerned about not having Hendon Hooker as the quarterback or not having Jermaine Waller in the secondary?
You know, there were no real surprises on that list. We knew Hendon Hooker wasn't going to play, and we've been hearing that Waller's having foot issues. By the way, when they gave us this list, they said this is not just necessarily COVID related. These are all reasons. These are the guys who won't be playing. So I'm not surprised, you know, and we get back to this whole depth chart discussion. I think Waller was listed first on the depth chart. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't know what that depth chart means. Doesn't really mean a whole lot. So I wasn't surprised by that. Wasn't surprised by Hooker. And the other guys were depth guys. The one that I didn't see coming was Oscar Shadley, the long snapper. Yeah. And you know, I made the point to somebody in the press box, Austin Peay basically lost their opening game this year because they didn't have their long snapper. You know, I wasn't real. You got to be concerned when you've already lost Caleb Farley to opting out, and now Waller's not on the field. So, you know, I don't even remember the original question, but none of that was a real surprise to me.
Well, yeah, it was not really a concern. But it was a concern, but they knew for a long time that Jermaine Waller wasn't playing in this football game.
Yeah.
So it's not like if they got surprised in the morning of the game, or like, oh dang, Waller tested positive.
Yeah.
He's been hurt all preseason. They knew Armani Chapman was going to start there. They knew Breon Murray was going to start there. So they had all that time, however many practices those two guys were available. You know, they had time to prepare those guys. It wasn't a last-minute thing.
By the way, I hope Breon Murray's getting teased during film review about letting Hawkman tackle him on that intersection.
Oh, Fuente made fun of him after the game.
He did some little stutter step. I think if he would have cut back, I think Hawkman would have fallen down and it would have been a touchdown.
So there's one name that we have not talked about yet, and he's going to get a lot of airtime here the remainder of the podcast, and that's Braxton Burmeister. It was the Braxton Burmeister show. We knew that he was going to play. Justin Fuente announced Hooker as the starter earlier, but he said that Braxton Burmeister would play, and well, he certainly showed why. He was announced as someone who would get action. 7-11 through the air, 106 yards, along of 46, and then on the ground, 9 carries for 67 yards, and just had a big part in the running game too, picking up 314 yards as a team on the ground.
So good in the running game.
Will, I'll ask you this.
Yeah.
On a scale of 1 to 10, given all the circumstances, 10 being great, how good was Braxton Burmeister in his Tech debut?
He was very good. Something that often gets discounted by the casual fan is game management. Are the plays getting in? Are you getting plays from the sideline? Are you managing the huddle? Are you getting the snap off? And he did all of that well. And I thought he was exactly what we were led to believe he was.
Mm-hmm.
He was very good in the running game. He was solid in the passing game. And again, they did not give him a lot of stuff. They didn't really challenge him with the passing game. But the one maybe exceptional pass that I remember is the pass down the middle to James Mitchell.
Oh, see,
it was a little high. Good catch.
Yeah, but he got a negative grade for that. You know why? Because
'Cause
Eric Gallo
Gallo
was
was
wide
wide
open. They were both open, but Gallo was on the outside, and there was no safety out there. If he thrown it to
Walking
Gallo, it would have been a touchdown.
No, that's subtle. So, see, I missed that.
Yeah.
I got to admit, I didn't really sit and watch the broadcast of the DVR copy of the game. But overall, he was, I think, exactly what we were told he'd be. And, if that's a guy that starts for you all season long, I think that can make that work.
Especially if the offensive line keeps mauling people, right?
Woof.
That makes everybody's job so much easier. I was impressed with him. I mean, we heard he was the fastest, quickest quarterback on the roster, and that's certainly true.
Yeah, he did get caught from behind once, got sacked. But man, overall on a 1 to 10, I'd give that an 8.
Yeah, I would best say about a 7.5, 8, something like that. I was pleased. It's tough to really judge either guy because, Braxton got hurt and came out, and then Quincy came in, and then Braxton finally got over his hand cramp, which I've never even heard of a hand cramp before. I've been either playing or watching or covering football for over 25 years, and I don't think I've ever seen anybody get a hand cramp before. I can't.
We'll talk about that in just a moment because there was an unsung hero called Mustard, which we'll get into in just a little bit. But I think Burmeister really contributed to that quick start on offense. It felt like in the blink of an eye, Virginia Tech's up 17-0 midway through the first quarter. So how pleasantly surprised were you that everything was clicking as well as it was, especially on that opening drive, Chris? It felt like they were getting chunk plays, play in and play out, moving the sticks every play.
I don't think, I know Justin Fuente said it multiple times, he's our fastest quarterback. And even Hendon Hooker said, like, that dude's a playmaker. But you can't really appreciate it unless you see it. And I'm sure NC State went back and watched him a bit at Oregon and looked at his high school film, but I don't think anybody quite realized he was as fast as he was. So I'm sure that was a shock to NC State. I certainly think it was. And it contributed to chunk plays in the running game. And speaking of chunk plays in the running game, that gives me a chance to talk about this. Virginia Tech ran for 314 yards. Let's say your goal is to rush for 200 yards every game and average 5 yards a carry while doing so. So that means 40 carries, you got to get to 200 yards. Well, it's unrealistic to expect your team to gain exactly 5 yards every play, right? And I've been preaching the last few years, Virginia Tech's running backs weren't breaking any tackles and
weren't making people miss.
They weren't making people miss and extending plays and things like that. You can't have a consistent running game without chunk yardage. And Virginia Tech did a better job of that last year, but when Tech got Herbert, I was really excited because I went back and watched his tape. And when he rushed for 200 yards or whatever against Boston College last year, it was chunk yardage after chunk yardage. And it was the same thing the other night. So Virginia Tech is now 7th nationally in runs of 20-plus yards. They're 5th nationally in runs of 30-plus yards. And they've played one game. Everybody ahead of them in the rankings has played 2 to 4 games. That's insane.
2 or 3, yep.
I mean, so the chunk yardage to me, and Burmeister was a part of this because he had his own share of big runs in this game. The chunk yardage is critical. I mean, you can never rush for 314 yards without chunk yardage.
Oh, yeah.
Real quick, let me give the numbers because we were about to transition into it. So many people contributed to 314 yards on the ground. Khalil Herbert, 6 carries. 6. 104 yards and a touchdown, a long of 31. Trey Turner, 2 carries for 53 yards. A big jet sweep. Quincy Patterson, 10 carries for 47 yards and a touchdown on the ground. Burmeister, 9 carries, 46 yards. Jalen Holston, 5 carries, 42 yards. And Raheem Blackshear, 8 touches for 28 yards. All that adds up to 314 yards on the ground.
I want to address the breakdown of the carries. Fuentes, first of all, around about the time the UVA game got postponed, we heard that Virginia Tech only had 3 scholarship running backs available to practice, 2 of which were true freshmen. Fuente was talking about Herbert after the game on the radio show, and he said he has not practiced very much recently. And we can tell you that Raheem Blackshear didn't come back to practice until Friday.
Right.
So he didn't, and Friday's practice is just like a walkthrough, basically.
Yeah.
So if you're wondering why none of those guys got more than 6 or 8 carries, it's because none of them hardly practiced recently, and and you're running back, you're going to get hit, man. You're going to get tackled, and you want to make sure you don't get a guy hurt because you give him too many carries when he hasn't been practicing the previous 2 weeks, right? So when you consider that none of the Tech's top running backs hadn't even been able to practice recently, what that running game did the other night is even more impressive.
And no turnovers.
Mm-hmm.
The only fumble I remember is the muffed punt by Tavion Robinson. And Dorian Strong helped him out there and covered it. No interceptions.
None.
Quincy threw into coverage a few times, but and Evan, do you have the stats for the game up there? How many penalties did Virginia Tech have?
As a team, let's see. Miscellaneous. I will try and find it in just a moment.
You could do a Control F.
Control F penalties.
Yeah.
Penalties. Let's
There
see.
you go.
Passing. Let's see. I'm reading the box score wrong. Let me How about this? I'm going to feed you a question and then I'm going to look up it.
You don't
That's a
usually
great
make rookie
idea.
mistakes, man.
I will say I was right on the individual. I need to find out.
I will say that the format for the box scores is a little.
I can give us some more while you look it up, Evan. Okay, so key guys in Virginia Tech's rushing attack the other night and their recruiting ranking.
Oh, okay. This is fun.
This is good. Khalil Herbert, and I'm sure people are out there saying, "My God, why didn't we recruit that guy out of high school?" You know, right? Well, his recruiting ranking out of high school was 2,117. Our fan base would be pissed if we had recruited Khalil Herbert out of high school. They would say he wasn't good enough.
Right.
Raheem Blackshear's recruiting ranking 1,489.
Right.
A lower level 3-star recruit. Brock Hoffman's rating out of high school, he was the number 3,977 player in the country.
See, that's just stupid.
All right, it's stupid for a lot of reasons. Why the heck would you rank 3,977 high school players? Like, once you get like past the first 1,000, what's the difference? I mean, how can you tell?
Yeah, they just used to call those guys 1-stars and 2-stars and leave it at that.
At any rate, so that's 3 key guys involved in the running game that nobody wanted out of high school.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of fans who would have been angry if Virginia Tech had signed those guys out of high school, right? And here they are now, our best players. So I'm not saying not to worry about recruiting. I'm saying don't let it keep you up nights. And also I'll say Justice Reed, 2 sacks. He was the number 799 recruit in the country. So he
he actually went to Florida.
He did right. Well, he was for Florida. He was a low level recruit.
Yeah, he was a 3-star guy.
That's a mid level 3-star guy too.
Yeah.
So that's like he would have been like probably Florida's like lowest.
Are we going to talk about Justice Reed later?
Yes,
Okay.
of course. We're going to get the defensive side of the ball.
But we have penalties.
We do. We do have penalties, which were not many, by the way. 5 penalties for 40 yards.
You know,
And I think a lot of those came like in the fourth quarter too. I don't remember Virginia Tech having maybe like 1 penalty in the first half.
you know, and so they didn't turn the ball over. They didn't commit a lot of penalties. You just didn't see a lot of misfires.
The one critical penalty was when Tech was up 17-0, and they got a punt return out to about the 50-yard line.
Yeah.
And Breon Murray got a taunting penalty, which pushed the Hokies back. And on the very next play, Burmeister got sacked and got the hand cramp. And the Hokies ended up punting from their own end zone and gave the ball to NC State at the 50. And that's when NC State scored their first touchdown on a short field. And you can trace it all the way back to Breon Murray's penalty. And that might have been Tech's only penalty of the first half.
And that was a 15-yard penalty. So
was.
the other 4 were for like 25 yards.
Right, exactly. So the others weren't.
Oh,
were
and
not critical.
one of them was, I think, a BS holding call on Hoffman. He had the hands inside, and then he pancaked the guy. And watching it on replay, I actually went on Twitter, and I'm like, did anybody actually see that holding? No, I will say the bit that I did, I had my attention half on the game as I watched it on DVR. Full disclosure, I was actually painting my kitchen yesterday. I had the television on replaying the game, so I would look at it at times. And I believe it's Raheem Blackshear's touchdown. You go back and watch that. And who's the left tackle?
Darisaw.
Who was left guard?
Lucita Smith.
It wasn't either one of those two guys. Something tells me it was Nestor. But you go back and you watch that touchdown. And number 39 for NC State, he is being grabbed and held. And it's in my notes somewhere exactly who was doing it. I don't recall. But he gave it the old hands up, just looking at the ref like, you see what's going on here? I can't move. And Blackshear runs right by him. So when you talk about nastiness on the offensive line, it's a lot of that too. You know, are you burying guys? Are you talking smack to them? Are you stepping right up to that line where you're holding them? You know, and how in the world did I get on this?
You think the offensive line had a lot of grit on Saturday?
Bum. We are about to do a grit promo. Do I need to put the hat on? Let's put the hat on.
So Will and Chris are wearing grit masks today. We've got 2 grit hats on the set. I'll throw one on with Will. Grit, a proud partner and sponsor here with Tech Sideline.
I'll tell you what I'll do. This is YouTube 101. I forgot to do this for some reason. In the description of the video, when we post this podcast to YouTube later, I will put the link to buy the grit hats. And, of course, you can find it on the Tech Sideline site. The More menu, our sponsors. And we'll also put the Campus Emporium link down there. So we'll put sponsor links down in the description of the YouTube video. That's the way it should be done. So
there was certainly a lot of grit on Saturday across the boards.
Nice segue as usual.
Let's finish up with the offense here, and then we got to take a break. We'll come back. Believe me, there's a lot to talk about the defense too. I want to finish up with the quarterbacks real quick, though. We're going to talk about Braxton Burmeister real quick and Mustard, and then we'll speak about Quincy Patterson a little bit more. First of all, so Burmeister gets a hand cramp. He's on the sideline for a couple of drives, and then it was reported that his mom, again, this is just 2020, right? I mean, that you can just walk down to the bench, essentially, and gave him packs of mustard to get him back on the field.
So I'm sitting in the press box, and he's saying that in the post-game interviews. Now Burmeister, I think they brought 4 guys out to talk to us, and 2 of them were really good. Justice Reed was a pretty good interview. Devon Diablo is a good interview. Brock Hoffman's a great interview. Justice Reed and Burmeister were kind of cliche machines, but Burmeister did start talking about the mustard and kind of laughed, and so we're all in the press box going, mustard? Apparently that's a thing. You know, he chuckled and said, yeah, there's a lot of salt in it. So I put that out on Twitter, and it leads to this string of responses like, oh yeah, the mustard is a thing to prevent cramps.
Also, pickle juices. Do you know that if you drink pickle juice? From
You
a
know,
jar?
I think my dad used to drink pickle juice. When he got older, he would have cramping issues, and I think pickle juice was something. he
bananas.
Yep.
Yeah, I think everybody knows bananas.
Yeah,
Though.
I eat a banana, like especially when I do leg day. A lot of times I will catch a cramp in my sleep and it'll wake me up.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
horrible,
that's
like a
painful.
calf cramp. So I eat a banana before I go to bed
Yeah.
every night.
So, anyways, Mustard, the unsung hero.
he got it from his
potentially.
mom. Well, a friend of mine met his mom on Saturday,
Mhm.
and he said she is Cali tan and Cali cool.
And she carries mustard.
Yep.
I hope that that'll always be associated with him somehow for the rest of his Tech career. Mustard, or, when signs come back.
Puns, did you see the mustard on that
Yes,
throw? And,
yes.
Man.
All right, so last thing, and then we're going to transition and take a break. I want to wrap up with Quincy Patterson because we talked a lot the last couple podcasts, of course, about Hendon Hooker and Braxton Burmeister. And I think it was Chris who even said how important it is in the 2020 world to have 3 quarterbacks who can go out there and play. 4 of 6 through the air, 75 yards, 2 touchdowns. I feel like he was another one of those unsung heroes because if Quincy wasn't out there moving the ball as well as Tech did when he was out there, who knows how that game would have gone at that point in the first half.
At one point, he was 4 of 4 for 75 yards and 2 touchdowns, and his passer rating was 422 points. So,
That's good.
hot tip, that would have been ahead of Joe Burrow last year.
Yeah.
So Quincy said after the game, I had a chance to ask Fuente. I was like, you let him sling it around a little bit. You just didn't limit him to the running game. And Fuente said that Quincy really handled being the third guy on the depth chart. Fuente said, I told him, it's not anything you're doing wrong. You're doing everything right. This is just where you are in your development, as Chris and I keep saying, but Quincy himself said that I believe the phrase he used last year in the UNC game, heart pounding. But this time around, he said, I was calm. I was prepared. And so he is developing at the rate he should be developing. Quincy Patterson is right where he needs to be, and I'm glad he got the playing time in.
Yeah, like Burmeister did not have a great career at Oregon when he was the starter, right?
As a freshman.
As a true freshman.
Yeah.
What do you expect when you throw young kids into the fire like that? I mean, everybody develops at a different rate, right? I mean, some guys are ready right off the bus, and some guys, it takes them a few years. That's twice now that Quincy's been called in cold off the bench for various reasons, and both times he came in and did well and helped the team win a game. So that says a lot about where he is mentally. The fact he's able to stay mentally engaged despite being third string. In this day and age of everybody worried about playing time, I'll say, and everybody hitting the transfer portal at the first sign of adversity, it's pretty refreshing. So to me, I'm great with Quincy. I'm good with where he's at. I'm glad to have him on the team. I think the program needs guys like him, and I'm just as high on his ceiling as I ever was. I mean, look, Hendon Hooker and Braxton Burmeister are good players, so what do you expect?
Yeah, and Quincy needs to work on the accuracy of his passing, but it's a good tight spiral. It's not like it's a wounded duck floating around out there. So
Sure. Just want to give him the credit that was due. +1 before the break, by the way. I do want to mention the receiving core briefly because the quarterbacks threw well. Only 5 players caught passes in this game. James Mitchell, 3 receptions, 68 yards, a touchdown. Khalil Herbert, 2 catches for 46 yards. Tavion Robinson, 4 receptions, 40 yards. And then Trey Turner caught 1 ball for 16 yards. And then Caleb Smith had that really big grab, and that set up the next play after the review of the touchdown. So
remember the last podcast, I was a little baffled at how Caleb Smith's playing time just disappeared last year after Damon Hazleton came back. You would have thought he would have played some, particularly given the way things went with Patterson and Grimsley and all those guys, and how a whole bunch of them transferred out. You would have thought that the coaches would have been locked into the fact that maybe Caleb Smith, number one, he can be productive, and number two, is more committed to the program. I don't want to cast aspersions on Grimsley because he had his own stuff going on. And we talked about Smith in the last podcast, and what a great catch. He's got skills and good size.
Yep, absolutely. All right, any thoughts on the offense before we transition?
Oh, I think we
went through
pretty well
everything.
covered it. I still have my concerns about wide receiver depth.
Didn't see anything from Hodge and Fairs.
Right. And like I said, Virginia Tech is not going to 100% maul everybody up front for 314 yards every game. So at some point, the traditional pass game will have to click in and win us a football game. But again, Braxton Burmeister, he practiced all last week. That's why he was the starter. But remember, he was 14 days in quarantine before that. He did not come out of quarantine until 8 days ago, last Sunday, and was out for 2 weeks before that. So it's not like he had practiced continuously all month. So there was a lot of things in there that would have caused Virginia Tech's passing game to not be quite as clean as it normally would be. So I don't think anybody can have any complaints about game one.
And I will say that we got information late last week that the number of positive COVID tests on the team is much larger than you would have thought. Mm-hmm. So what that means is there's a lot of guys who won't even be tested for, however long their 90-day window is. Hopefully there will be fewer positive cases coming in because so many guys already had it, and you won't get that contact tracing blast radius. I think it was very important to get this game in. They got it in, and now they can get themselves in football shape and keep going.
Yeah, we're not going to say they're in the clear, but because there will be some issues here and there pop up.
But they should be coming on the downside of it.
Correct. It's all downhill from here.
Yeah.
Well, the defense was really good on Saturday in Virginia Tech's 45-24 win. We'll talk about it when we come back from this break. You're watching and listening to episode 136 of the Tech Sideline Podcast, brought to you by the Fisher Law Firm. Welcome back in episode 136 of the Tech Sideline Podcast, recording on Monday morning, September 28th. It's great to have you with us. Evan Hughes, Chris Coleman, Will Stewart, Malcolm Stewart, breaking down Virginia Tech's 45-24 win over North Carolina State to open their season. We spent almost an hour talking about the offense, and there's so much to talk about with the defense in the win. We talked about who was leading them on Saturday, and Ryan Smith, who called a great game. Chris, what's the story here? Is it the defensive line, the amount of sacks that Virginia Tech brought in Justice Reed, or is it Keontae Jenkins and members of the secondary stepping up?
Yeah, it's kind of a combination of everything. To me, the story is the lack of coaches that were available, not just during the game, but all week. Bill Terlink was back for the game. Darryl Tapp was able to be in the booth in quarantine for the game. Those guys were not available to coach all week, though. They were not back until game day. Zach Sparber, the graduate assistant who coached the defensive line during the bowl game last year, was also out. So, in effect, Jared Hewitt...
And Jack Tyler.
I'm just talking about defensive line right now.
Right.
So, in effect, Jared Hewitt was Virginia Tech's defensive line coach all of last week in practice. A player coach. At linebacker...
From a good source.
Right. At linebacker, we know Tracy Claeys at some point last week, they learned he was going to be out. So he was out for at least part of last week. We don't know when Jack Tyler, it was determined he would be out, but he would be the backup linebacker coach to Tracy Claeys. As far as I know, there is no backup linebacker coach to Jack Tyler. So It's possible that Virginia Tech went through at least part of last week with Dax Holyfield and Rayshard Ashby basically serving as de facto coaches of the linebackers, unless Justin Hamilton coached both safeties and linebackers at the same time during the course of the week. I don't know. But it's not just who's missing during a game, it's who's missing during the week. And the fact that they were able to put something cohesive together, despite missing all those guys throughout the course of the week, is extremely impressive.
Yes, so if you want to talk about defensive line,
let's start with the defensive line, and let's start with Justice Reed, because I thought he was one of the stories of the game.
So you go back and watch Justice Reed's highlights at Youngstown State. I think he had 13 sacks last year. And, you start to think about the level of competition. But watching his highlights, I did think that there were a few instances where he looked explosive. And that's what I saw on Saturday night. There were a couple of plays where – there's that moment where the defensive lineman gets free and it's him and the quarterback, and how quickly can he close on that quarterback? Mm-hmm. And it's all in once you've shed the blocker, what is your burst in that short area? And I thought he was very impressive a couple of times in closing. Hockman's not elusive at all, so it wasn't like Reed had to break down and change direction or anything like that. But it just just covering a lot of ground quickly and taking a guy down before he can get up to speed and get away from him. And that impressed me.
You know, this was the first game with no Charlie Wiles as defensive line coach. Obviously, Bud Foster no longer here. Did you notice anything different schematically with the defensive line or the defense in general in game one?
I wasn't so much looking for that, and I'm not an expert in that anyway.
Yeah.
I'm sure Brandon Patterson will address that later this week when he writes an article for us. I thought I saw more zone. Like for example, the interception that Breon Murray got, that was pure zone across the board. He was just sitting there waiting. Maybe that interception doesn't happen last year, but that's the one thing I can probably think of is zone. As far as up front though, it's hard for me to tell.
A couple of stats I want to read off, especially from the defensive line. Again, Justice Reed, 3 solo tackles, a total of 5, 2 sacks. A couple of other notes. Emmanuel Belmar had a good game with 4 tackles. Mari Barno had 4 tackles as well. But I again, jumping out of the box score, let's talk about the secondary. Keontae Jenkins, who we've really only been talking about for a week, replacing Devin Hunter in that rover spot, leads the team in tackles with 8 of them. 5 assists, 3 solo tackles. Again, in that rover spot, you've got 2 true freshmen in the 2 deep. Chris, how impressive was Keontae Jenkins in
He
this
did a
game?
good job because he really only got his name called once, and that was for a positive play. That was fairly early in the game when he made that one-on-one tackle in the flat.
Yeah,
that was very, very impressive play to make that tackle in space like that. So that's a very good sign going forward. I mean, look, I'm not a safeties coach. I'm sure Justin Hamilton will meet with him on Zoom and say, here's what you did wrong.
Right.
But
and NC State was unable to really stress Tech's defensive backfield. With
yeah, you know, their quarterback play is bad, and their receivers aren't very good either. You know, I know somebody who knows somebody on the NC State staff, and this guy basically said, we're in trouble this year because our quarterbacks are basically scout team level.
Yeah.
Like, they don't even think Devin Leary's any good. He just happens to be better than Hockman.
I thought he was good.
Well, he was good when Tech had packed it in and then the game was over.
I think he has potential.
But I don't know. You know, last year he completed 48% of his passes, right?
Devin Leary?
Devin Leary did.
Okay.
Yeah. He did well against a depleted secondary that had a 30-point lead. Right? Most quarterbacks are going to do well in that scenario. But at any rate, yeah, you know, it's not like NC State is going to challenge you from a passing game standpoint. Now, they do have a good line and good running backs. And they did run the ball pretty well. But again, what did we just talk about? Virginia Tech, they didn't have a defensive line coach all week. We don't know exactly what their coaching situation was at linebacker. Like, even during the game, I have no idea who coached the linebackers during the game, right? Nobody, I assume.
Who made decisions to substitute.
Right.
Right, exactly.
So something I thought about before you get to the next, something I thought about, as much as you want to compliment Virginia Tech for how well they coached in this game, this was a pretty poorly coached game on NC State's part. You know, I thought they should have clued in pretty early that they should just line up and play smash mouth with Tech, play to their strengths, play with their running backs, and try to wear out a Tech defensive line that hadn't played a game yet. You know, I think they put too much on their quarterback. I'm not saying they put a lot, but they probably put too much on him. I just don't think they played to their strengths very well at all.
Yeah.
Again, so Keontae Jenkins was a bright spot, certainly on defense. Will, last week, Chris said that if he could get Divine Diablo to not just be a 10, just be a 7 out there in the secondary, I think was one of the paraphrasing, but that was the quote, that the secondary would be in good hands. Diablo, 6 tackles, and an interception. I think he was better than a 7 on Saturday. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, he was good. I haven't had a chance to evaluate him in run defense.
He graded out well in PFF overall.
Did he?
Very, very well. He might have been our highest grader on defense. No, those are early preliminary grades. They'll change between now and Wednesday.
Yeah.
But the early returns at overall, he had a really good game.
Good. Because he's a big, scary looking guy, and I've always felt that he could be more of a terror in the running game than he's been. So, yeah, definitely had a good night, and that interception was phenomenal.
It really was. Jumped the route on a little out route, it looked like.
And then had the body control to twist and hold on to the ball. That was a great play.
He said after the game, when he was with Laser and Burnup, he said, they were in an empty set formation, and I thought that was the route the guy was going to run. So I jumped it. So that's good scouting by Tech's defensive staff.
Now let's talk about the corners here. I want to spend some time. Again, we talked earlier about how Tech didn't have 23 players available on Saturday, one of which was Jermaine Waller. Again, we talked about it last week. We didn't know if he would play. He's been battling that foot injury. Like you said, they had time to work with who they were going to have at the corner spot. But let's talk about Breon Murray with 5 tackles and an interception. How pleased were you with what he was able to do as that second corner spot?
I see plenty of raw ability in Breon Murray, for sure. I think he's got some cornerback instincts and looks like he has a chance to be a good player. He's still very, very raw, in my opinion. He was a guy he was a JUCO, and he left after he redshirted his first year in JUCO. He's a guy I think had to walk on his JUCO team. Like if you really want to get down in the recruiting rankings, this is a guy who would have been a 0-star recruit as a walk-on JUCO player, right? Then he played some as more of a safety type as a redshirt freshman, and then he transferred to Tech, so he's a redshirt sophomore last year. I don't think he'd ever been like a full-time cornerback before, so he's still pretty raw. He needed spring practice because he's still getting used to the Power 5 level and still getting used to playing cornerback, quite frankly. Didn't get spring practice. We don't know how much he practiced or didn't practice during August. He did nearly give up the deep ball for a touchdown.
Hockman couldn't take advantage of it.
Hockman couldn't take advantage of it. But that was more of a and that's what I said. I said last week I was concerned about Tech and zone coverage if they hadn't been able to practice as much. Zone is something. It's kind of like playing quarterback and wide receiver. The timing has to be there when you're passing off guys in coverage and things like that. And that was a zone coverage mistake. So that's a worry early in the season. If Virginia Tech was straight up man-to-man like they were a lot under Bud Foster the last few years, you wouldn't have that worry because man-to-man coverage, it's easy from a mental standpoint.
Yeah, against UNC, that's a touchdown.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I'm impressed with Murray. I think he has talent, but I still think he's a little bit raw, and hopefully he stays healthy and continues to get a lot of reps because I certainly think he has potential as a player.
Yeah.
Awesome.
The break on the interception was smooth, man.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Really was.
And he almost had one later in the game where he broke on the ball.
Yeah.
Almost came up with it, yeah.
A couple of cornerbacks. I mean, again, Devin Taylor, the transfer.
He had a kind of a rough night, but again, he got here really, really, really late, and we don't know how much he was able to practice, and blah, blah, blah. We're going to use that qualifier with everybody, right? But I mean, it's true. The guy whose name we didn't call all night was Armani Chapman, and that's great.
Yeah,
that's great. It means he locked down his side of the field.
The defense had to be tired going to the sidelines a lot because they were working hard. They were probably drinking a lot of water. And there is a great cup on our set right now. It's time for another sponsor promo. We have a great Yeti cup. Virginia Tech Yeti here as Will's going to pick it up. The old school VT logo. Look at that. Will, tell us a little bit about.
So this is from Campus Emporium, and it's very cool. It does have the old school VT logo. So let me read this. It's called their Virginia Tech Powder Coated Vault Tumbler. Vault is the term that I believe Virginia Tech uses for stuff with the retro logo. It's not just a Campus Emporium thing. So if you go to Campus Emporium, search on Vault, you'll get stuff with all the old logos on it, which is really cool. So let's see. What can I tell you about this? 30 ounce. They also got it available in 20 ounce. It's cool as heck. I'm not going to drink from it because this I have to return to them. So I don't want to stick my mouth on it. $32.99, and I will put the link that will take you directly to this in the YouTube description of the video. But like I said, if you like the retro stuff and you go to Campus Emporium's website and just search on Vault, you got a lot of stuff to pick from there. So this thing's really cool. Yeah, absolutely. I might go look into that myself. And that shirt that you had on last week as well, the Hawaiian, the Columbia camp shirt is what that was called. Yeah.
Wait until next week when we promote the tack shaver on the show.
We're going to go underwater with the tack shaver.
and figure out whether that's actually a true statement.
Can't wait for that. All right, let's wrap things up. We're running a little over here, but I do want to spend a couple of minutes on the linebacking core. Dax Hollifield tied for second in tackles with Alan Tisdale. They both had 7. Dax came on a third down blitz, was credited with a half of a sack. Rayshard Ashby only 6 tackles, but he did have a sack. Linebacking core, this is an experienced group. Thoughts on week 1 for them?
Oh, it's so hard to say. Tisdale started at backer. I was a little bit surprised. Dax also played. I need to get on PFF for my Inside the Numbers article this week. That'll be part of that. I'm going to break down numbers there, who played the most snaps,
Yeah,
et
so you want
cetera,
to talk about content coming up this week. We're going to have some great content.
Yeah, got to figure out when I'm going to run it all. Good gracious, because it's a lot.
It's our managing editor.
It's hard at work.
Linebacker play in general, though, like I didn't think Ashby had his best game, but Ashby was out for 10 to 14 days at one point, and then when he came back, again, we don't know if he actually had a coach. So it's kind of hard to judge there either way. Bottom line is I completely trust Rayshard Ashby to be a really good middle linebacker for Tech when he's healthy and in the groove, and he's always coaches there and everything like that. So I didn't see anything. I didn't see anything to worry me.
I thought the timing of the blitz calls was excellent.
I agree with that. Yeah.
I actually completely agree on the Dax Hollifield blitz. I thought was a perfect time.
They brought Keontae Jenkins at one point, and he got to the quarterback and was smart enough to pull up. Like a lot of guys would have just gone right in there and gotten a rough in the passer penalty. I think they blitzed Breon Murray one time even. I think the timing was good. They mixed up the variety of blitzes and everything like that. So it'll be interesting to read about what Brandon Patterson says about it, because he's going to notice certain things that us regular humans can't.
Regular folks won't notice.
Yeah.
Love it. Last note, and then we're going to wrap things up. Special teams, Brian Johnson. Felt like a couple of years ago was a little bit of a slow start to his career. He nails a 49-yarder and a 46-yarder and a 29-yarder.
I wish I had the stats because I put it in my special teams preview. But it was something like kicks beyond 40 yards. Early in his career, he was
almost over.
He was almost pretty much over.
Yeah.
And then starting with the Notre Dame game last year, I think he's almost 100% and that includes 1 or 2 from like beyond 50. So it's like it's like night and day. You rarely see that kind of change in a player. Like overnight, he goes from not being able to make a kick at all beyond 40 yards to now making every single one of them.
Down the middle would have been good from 55.
Yeah, exactly. Incredible.
So at one point, as I was painting my kitchen, I heard the announcer say something like 13 in a row, and I thought, I got to go look that up. He's made a bunch of kicks in a row, so I'll have that in Monday.
I wonder if the last one he missed was the North Carolina game in overtime.
Could be. That would have been.
That was the week before.
That would have
Notre
been
Dame.
in October.
Yep.
I'll go look that up, and I'll run the stats.
Yeah,
down
it was Notre Dame when the streak started with the long kicks, because I remember being impressed because it was cold and windy that day, and I'm like, it's beyond 40, it's cold and windy, there's no way he's going to make this kick,
and he did.
And he did, and I don't think he's missed one since.
Gentlemen, I apologize, we are over an hour by a good measure, but there was just so much good to talk about this week, and it just felt so good to talk about a football game and a 45-24 win for Virginia Tech. We're going to have another podcast later in the week to preview the Duke game. Duke is 0-3 on the season, lost to Virginia.
I think their quarterback has thrown 2 touchdowns and 6 interceptions and is barely completing 50% of his passes.
Yeah, he's the transfer from Clemson.
It seems like this year in the ACC, you've either got really good quarterback play or really bad quarterback play.
I think you've either got, in the case of Clemson and maybe Miami, you've got really good teams, then you got a bunch of good teams, and you got a bunch of bad teams.
I agree with that 100%. There doesn't seem to be a lot of average in the ACC. You're either there's Clemson, and then I think there's a few teams you can say are very, very good, and there's like 5 teams at the bottom that are just like bad. I can't decide which is the worst team in the ACC, like Florida State or whoever.
Gosh, Florida
State. I guess it's Florida
Oh.
State, but it might be Duke. Duke actually might be the worst team in the ACC. I think across the board they're actually solid, but they don't have anything at wide receiver anymore, and their quarterback is so bad.
Yeah.
There's the feelings going into this year's Duke game is just so different than the feelings going into last year's Duke game.
Yeah, you actually picked.
I
Duke
picked us to
win
lose because Duke had looked good, pretty good the first few weeks of the season, and we had looked terrible. So I picked Duke to win the game.
Yeah,
But I don't feel that way at all this year. I think they look bad, and I think we look good.
Syracuse, Duke, NC State, and Wake are all pretty bad. I think. I'm not sure. I'm not. There's a team that
Virginia might be average.
Yeah. Boston College might be kind of average. Better than you'd think.
I would have agreed with that before this past weekend. And
what happened this past weekend?
Oh, they were down by 2 touchdowns late to Texas State and almost lost.
Okay.
They had to kick the game-winning field goal with like 3 seconds left. Yeah.
All right. Anyway.
Interesting discussion, and I also think we could talk about a different time. Pitt, I was very proud of my prediction. They did beat Louisville. I think the Panthers 3-0, and then the U now inside the AP top 10.
Are they really?
Put a hurting on Florida State. I don't know what that means, but anyways, ACC is all over the place.
I wish we played Florida State. Gosh,
every week.
Well, you got Duke this week. Trey Turner tweeted yesterday, a year ago today. He was tweeting about how, I think it was either today or yesterday, I forget which day, but he was tweeting that a year ago was the Duke game, so it's on their mind.
I got the reminder. I got the picture on Facebook today of me tailgating with Andrew Jones, the former Braves center fielder. I got that this morning when I woke up, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's just been a year since the Duke game.
Oh
yeah.
Gosh.
Well, listen, we're well over an hour. This was fun. It was so great to be back talking about a Virginia Tech game. We spent the last 6 months on podcasts just trying to,
get to this point.
get to this point, exactly. So it's great to be back. And as I always do, to close it, Chris, we just kind of alluded to it. What's coming up on TechSideline.com this week?
Oh, we got part 2 of J-Rob. Corey's already sent that. I've got to decide when to run it. We got
great stuff.
We got Brandon Patterson. If I have time to write an Inside the Numbers column, we'll have that. We'll have probably 4 more articles from Jake Lyman, Corey Van Dyke. We'll have the Tech Talk Live Notes. We'll have a game preview. We'll have another podcast. We'll have another Brandon Patterson article previewing Duke. We'll have a Friday Q&A. We'll have 2 Jason Stame articles. Yeah, I'm gonna have to cut something out, man. I don't know.
Well, I told you I'd help you edit that stuff.
Yeah, I know.
But I got to write my own article.
You got to write your own article. Oh, yes, and we'll have Monday Thoughts. I forgot about that.
Yeah, but by the time people hear the podcast or see the video, it'll probably already be up.
That's true.
So if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit like and give us a thumbs up.
And subscribe.
In short, a lot is coming up this week and every week throughout the course of the season.
$8.49 a month, gang. Hop on board.
Hokies are 1-0. We try and go 1-0 every day here at Tech Sideline. That'll do it. Episode 136 of the Tech Sideline podcast. Special thanks to the best producer in the land, Malcolm Stewart, behind the scenes. He's Chris Coleman, our managing editor, our founder and general manager, Will Stewart. I'm your podcast host, Evan Hughes, saying so long. Thanks so much for watching and listening to episode 136 of the Tech Sideline podcast, brought to you by the Fisher Law Firm. Have a great week, Hokies.